From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group. I'm Tom Rogan, your host. This week's guests are Pat Buchanan, Eleanor Clift, Clarence Page, and our guest from the Federalist this week is David Marcus. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
On that note, we shall get to our first issue, which is Issue 1, Battling Bill. House Judiciary Democrats on Tuesday grilled Attorney General William Barr, while Barr defended President Trump's decision to send federal law enforcement officers into various cities. Democrats attacked the Attorney General as a puppet for Trump's excesses. The phrase of the day was, quote, reclaiming my time, unquote,
I'm reclaiming my time.
from Democrats who interrupted Barr before he could respond to their questions. This led to Barr's exasperated riposte.
That Congress can determine the meaning of inhabitant for this purpose, that it is not a self-defining term as they
only got 2 minutes, sir.
that they recognized.
Mr. Barr, if I
Yeah,
may.
but this is a hearing. I thought I was the one that was supposed to be heard.
Pat, we've had the president obviously changing some of the narrative on Thursday with his comments about perhaps postponing the election. But how did you see this showdown between the Attorney General and Democrats? Didn't it calcify just that proof of partisanship that now defines our political landscape?
I'll say, Tom, basically what we saw up there was an American version of the Soviet trials of the show trials of the 1930s, with Barr in the witness seat and being accused and charged and attacked and insulted. And then when he answered, he said, basically, give me back my time. What did this show? I think it showed Barr doing very well. I think most folks came away supporting their man or their team in this. But I will say, it was one of the worst performances I've ever seen by a congressional committee.
Eleanor, your thoughts?
There was plenty of grandstanding on both sides. That isn't exactly new. And I don't think we learned anything particularly new about the Attorney General, except that he is going to function as a tool of the president's. While he was testifying, Vice President Pence was negotiating with the governor of Oregon to withdraw the federal paramilitary troops from the city of Portland. There's a division within the administration about how far to go with this occupation of American cities. It's so transparently a political ploy, and the consensus is that it basically inflames violence. It doesn't reduce it. Also, what Barr said about the election was truly chilling. He's parroting what the president is saying, that you can't trust mail-in votes, that foreign countries are going to somehow hack our election with millions of bogus ballots. I mean, there's no evidence to any of this. And when he was challenged about the fact that there's no evidence that foreign countries could interfere with a mail-in election, he said it was just common sense. Whose common sense? Only that of an administration that is desperately backing up a president who has basically said he'll do anything to try to retain power.
David, do you think, one of the angles the president has taken here, Bill Barr, is the idea of law and order, and with Democrat rhetoric, Eleanor speaking there, that Democrats see this as an occupation, potentially quite a hostile narrative towards police officers that may or may not be damaging. And yet, why do you think the president is coming out with these comments about mail-in ballots, and then on Thursday, as I noted, suggesting maybe the election should be deferred?
I mean, I think the president's doing that because there are legitimate concerns about having a presidential election with this amount of mail-in ballots when we've never done it before. I think, it could take a very, very long time to determine what the results are. I think we could see lawsuits like we've never seen before. So I definitely think there are legitimate concerns, and certainly the president was trolling a bit with the 3 question marks at the end of his tweet. But to get back to Eleanor's point, I think Barr, even though it's telling when there's a witness, usually if there's a witness who's either made mistakes or is telling lies, you want to give the witness time to talk. You want to ask them the tough question, and you want to watch them squirm. They couldn't do that. When Representative Jayapal said, well, why did you send, why did you have federal officers in Portland, but not in Michigan? And it's only because one's Trump supporters and one, isn't. Barr was about to make a very competent answer, which is that in Michigan, it was a state house. In Portland, it's a federal courthouse, so I have authority. She didn't let him because that would have ruined his soundbite. And I think that was really the disservice to the American people, is that the administration does have very good answers for why they're dealing with these people who are literally trying to burn down a courthouse.
Okay.
And thankfully now Portland authorities are going to deal with it, which they should have in the first place.
Okay. Clarence, very good arguments.
Well, they did deal with it. Local authorities were dealing with it, and as everyone should know by now, before the federal troops came in, the action was scaling down. There were fewer people outside, and then when these unannounced federal troops arrive, and that's why I call them, although folks also like to call them agents, they're people cobbled together by Homeland Security mostly, from other services like the Border Patrol, and is now patrolling our border with Oregon. I don't know what that's all about. But anyway, the fact is that Barr performed very well. I thought I expected this kind of performance. He knows the law from a very, very conservative point of view, and a very pro. He favors a strong executive. Meaning that whatever the president wants to do, he can do it, which is just what Donald Trump was looking for when he said, "Who's going to be my Roy Cohn?" And he's got him in a very competent way, a very articulate way with Bill Barr. But you know, I thought in civics class I learned that the Attorney General was supposed to be a somewhat quasi-independent a voice for the law and the Constitution. President Trump treats him like his own personal lawyer, and Bill Barr's going along with that.
Okay, well, let's quickly do a round robin again with the panelists. So, Pat, yeah.
Tom, you know, when Bill Barr, I thought he did an outstanding job there. But what we have not heard from the Democrats, basically, all we get is peaceful protesters. Now, these protests in Portland, they're going after the Mark Hatfield building. They were going night after night after night. They went for 60 days, they've gone now almost. And nary a word of condemnation has come from the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. And I think Joe Biden recognizes what's going on, because when they trotted him out this week, he did say people that do what they're doing out there, breaking up things, ought to be arrested, prosecuted, and put in jail. And I do think, I mean, the idea that federal agents are responsible for the 2 months of tearing down statues and smashing and rioting and anarchism, in addition to the peaceful protests, I think that's absurd. So,
Eleanor.
Well, when I look at Portland, I see the wall of moms. I see the wall of vets. I see that Navy vet being clobbered for just coming up and asking some question. There's no I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that the intervention of the federal agents, or whatever term we're using, brought out more protesters. And I think when we start looking, there probably are some infiltrators. There are some opportunistic looters, yes. There are also some of the Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys and all that. But for the most part, these are peaceful protests. And Justice Department, Barr, they're talking about sending more federal quasi troops into Cleveland, Detroit, and Milwaukee, I believe. And to David's point, I don't think they're going there to protect federal buildings. There weren't any named federal buildings. They're going in there to, if needed, help create the images of chaos and violence that the president needs to distract from the fact that we passed 150,000 dead Americans this week and 4.5 million people infected. And there's no clear strategy, no national strategy to restrain the virus. That is his major problem. And to resurrect an old saying, he can run, but he can't hide.
Okay, we've got about 80 seconds.
And by the way, there's about two blocks of this riot zone. That's it. The rest of Portland is the same as it's always been. And why, if the president was right, why did he send his troops in there unannounced? Like he's taking over the town. He's just directly intruding and provoking. This is kind of like some kind of a Fort Sumter over again, I guess. But the fact is that people are being arrested out there. Local authorities are prosecuting, and the outsiders were not needed, except, as Eleanor says, to give President Trump and some nice visuals for his ads.
David, your
why
thoughts?
is
Well, let's let David.
protect the federal building provocative?
Okay.
Absolutely, but to address the wall of vets, I mean, we always respect veteran service, but there's veterans in the Hells Angels. There's veterans in the Aryan Brotherhood. That doesn't just
There's even veterans in the press, by the way.
Yes, that doesn't validate a movement. And if the new rule, there's 18 million veterans in America. If the new rule is we have to do what they say, they voted for Trump 2-1. So I think Republicans would sign up for that.
All right.
Evidence discrading the wall of vets that showed up in Portland. If you don't, I wouldn't speak so
they are vets.
about
I'm sure
it.
they are vets. I'm just saying that doesn't that doesn't give them magical moral superiority.
Let's move on. A concluding thought, though. We love our veteran Clarence. Anyway, issue 2, tech reform.
The trust customers put in us every day has allowed Amazon to create more jobs in the United States over the past decade than any other company. Hundreds of thousands of jobs across 42 states. Amazon employees make a minimum of $15 an hour.
Jeff Bezos argues his Amazon technology giant is good for consumers, workers, and the nation. Also testifying to Congress this week, the chief executives of Apple, Facebook, and Google made the same arguments. But Democrats believe these tech giants may have become too big, stifling innovation by swallowing up smaller startups. And Republicans suggest the tech firms have an anti-conservative bias in their publication choices.
Eleanor, conflicting signs from both parties in terms of what they want from the tech companies, but based on those tech companies' earnings reports this week, one might suggest the American people are very much in their favor, no?
We have a tradition in this country, we don't like monopolies. And I think the questioning from both the left and the right on that committee, from the Democrats and the Republicans, it was universally critical, but for different reasons. The Democrats are much more worried about how these tech giants are crushing any kind of opposition. And the Republicans are complaining that somehow conservative viewpoints are being shut out, when frankly they've used these tech giants very successfully to expand their movement, and spread a lot of propaganda that is not true. But both sides are critical, and this committee, which is the Democratic Congress, this committee is doing serious work. They're going to come back with a report in August, and there is regulation coming for these tech giants, and I think it's high time and it's appropriate.
Pat.
I'm not sure that there's going to be any great dramatic legislation. These are huge, powerful institutions, the biggest we've ever seen in our lives, more powerful in many ways than control of Standard Oil. But they do so many things that people want, especially in this pandemic. I mean, Amazon delivers an awful lot of goods here. I've got a lot of Apple products. I've had them for 30 or 40 years. I don't know what I'd do without that left-wing Google when you're going and researching things like that. I used to work at a newspaper where I'd go out to what they call the morgue dump, little packets of clippings, and you'd open those, all the past writings, and read those. And now it's click, click, click. So I think these giants, I think as long as they keep their ears and eyes open and don't do something stupid and arrogant, they're probably going to be, by and large, okay.
Clarence, your thoughts?
Well, by the way, Pat, the morgue is now called the reference library in this PC age. but in fact, they virtually don't exist now. We all have Google, and it's replaced it. One thing about these hearings, whenever they bring the tech giants in for a hearing, as we learned in the past, a lot of members of Congress haven't really bothered to learn that much about how Google and the internet works. They've learned more than they knew before, which is good. But it's not possible for our legislature, that's designed to move slowly and deliberately, to keep up with the changes going on out there. That's what happened when they broke up Ma Bell. Remember, they said we're going to have a lot of little baby bells, and before you know it, like an amoeba, they all came back together again in a different fashion. But it's very hard to prevent monopoly if the market is moving that away. But having said that, it's important that the tech giants be accountable, because they do have so much power, and the public shouldn't be afraid of them even while they love them.
You know, Dave, one of the things that's interesting here, we think about Google and Google News, for example, where the curators post articles that they prefer. You know, maybe it's just my reading, and maybe I got it wrong, but it doesn't seem that publications like National Review or The Federalist have as much play on there as perhaps CNN does. Maybe that's fair, maybe that's right, but is that something that concerns you?
I mean, we are concerned. I mean, the Federalist itself has had situations where people have tried, NBC News tried to get us demonetized.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's an issue, but look, there's a considerable schism on the right over this issue, because the more libertarian free market wing says, the Congress has no idea, to Clarence's point, what they're doing there. These people are creating millions of jobs, making all this money. They know what they're doing. The common good social conservative side says they do know what they're doing. What they're doing is silencing conservatives and showing porn to kids and creating a platform for predators. So I've got feet in sort of both of these worlds, but I'll tell you, I don't really mind the CEOs getting a little chin music and getting brushed off the plate a little bit. I think Congress needs to send the message that if they don't clean up their own act, which is preferable, the government does have the ability to step in and do some things.
Eleanor, I'll just ask you a question, and then you give your comments. But one of the underlying things in antitrust law is whether there is ultimately a measured benefit over a measured cost. And the litigation, I mean, do you think it's really feasible that we might see, there might be consensus on the Hill for this, but do you think it's feasible that we would see legislation in the coming years?
I want to say we all love Amazon, but they have destroyed a lot of retail establishments, and they've done it unfairly. And we all love Apple, but everybody here has got to be confused. Once you get an Apple product, try to change it or get an app from somewhere else. I mean, they've got a chokehold on the marketplace. So the committee has done its homework. That's the point I was trying to make. And they have uncovered lots of documents that show in black and white written terms how these companies have gone about illegally destroying competition. That is illegal. So I do think you can have that sort of legislation. I mean, I think they've got to be restrained. And the sums of money they are accumulating is also
on the point,
it's all out of whack for today's world.
Pat, isn't this just too close to the First Amendment, though, to think that we're going to see any regulation of what speech these companies allow or are forced to put online?
As Thomas Jefferson said, in questions of power, let's hear no more of trust in men, but bind them down by the chains of the Constitution. However, I think that these institutions, they ought to be much more receptive to the kinds of attacks and disagreements and arguments they're getting. They've got a gold mine, and if they handle it right, they won't lose it all.
Well, I agree with that. It's a situation that has put us behind the curve as far as the technological developments go. But when it comes to content, interestingly enough, the heads of these giants don't have a lot of concern about content. They just are concerned about how it moves and where. It's the politicians who are more concerned about it, certainly. In the hearing, I was hearing folks on the Republican side speaking a lot about how they're so discriminated against by the tech giants. And it seems like my own unscientific surveys and with my daily use, I find a heck of a lot of activity on all parts of the right as well as the left. But from the very beginning, we found with Twitter, for example, conservative users seem to grab onto it more quickly than liberals did. So those arguments always go on like they do with any other First Amendment dispute.
All right, very quick. If you can do 15-second closing thoughts, David. Sorry, we've run out of time.
I mean, look, I don't think that Congress wants to act. I think this is really a situation where they're just trying to send a message that says, clean up your act, please clean up your act, because if you don't, we have to.
Right, great, thank you. Very good, very good. All right, we will move on. Issue 3, Coronavirus Bailout, Part 2.
As the coronavirus pandemic continues its rampage, average daily deaths now stand at 1,000 in the United States, with total deaths of nearly 160,000. And in Congress, Democrats and Republicans are negotiating over a second pandemic stimulus bill. Democrats want $3.4 trillion. Republicans say new spending should be capped at a third of that amount. One sticking point is Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's demand for a 5-year coronavirus liability shield for entities which remain open or decide to open up.
When the economy began to reopen.
Clarence, we have had some consensus now moving towards some common ground perhaps in this stimulus, but how do you see playing out towards election day the competing element of the Democratic Party that says maintain a very high, very generous subsidy to workers who effectively have no income anymore, and Republicans who say be careful there because we're incentivizing never returning to work?
Well, this is the typical divide between the right and the left. It makes for healthy debates. Right now, though, it's a campaign time. We're heading toward an election. And I, for the life of me, don't know how to tell people who are barely getting by already that you're not going to give them any more help, or you're going to give them about half the help that they need. If we're talking $200, $400, these are the kind of sums that it's tough for a family to stretch that far. And yet the language I've been hearing has been like, hey, they're really all a bunch of moochers out there, and they ought to just get out and go to work, the hell with the pandemic or whatever. It just doesn't make a good look politically, I would say.
David, your thoughts?
You know, this will come down somewhere in the middle between the $1 and the $3 trillion. Both sides will declare certain victories. But the real issue here is that, yes, this is an emergency and we probably need to help people, but we can't kick this can down the road indefinitely. These are exorbitant sums of money. I live in New York City, which is still by and large shut down. I don't have the slightest idea when Broadway is going to open, or museums, or you're going to be able to go into a restaurant. And I think the idea that we can continue, you know, Governor Cuomo likes to call it a pause. It's not a pause. It's a regression. We are losing every day. And I don't know how we climb back out of it. So yeah, I think we have to help people right now. But the bigger issue is getting America back to work, because there's a reckoning coming and it's going to be devastating.
Eleanor.
You're not going to get people back to work if you can't get the virus under control. The states opened up too soon, and now they're having to double back because of the escalation in the number of virus infections. McConnell isn't even sitting down with Pelosi and Schumer. The Treasury Secretary, Mnuchin, is left to handle this. He's doing a yeoman's job, but his understanding of what real people suffer in this country is not, it's not at all applicable to the situation. The simplest thing they can do is just extend the payments. It's what will save the economy. It's what the chairman of the Federal Reserve says needs to be done. Just do it.
Okay, Pat, you.
They are. The 33% contraction in GDP is pretty large, the biggest in history. I think what the Democrats have a strong hand in this sense. Pelosi wants $3.5 trillion or $3 trillion. That's it. So she says, this is what we want to give the American people, and the Republicans won't help us. Republicans are divided, as Dave suggested, between the deficit hawks who've come alive again and others who say we've got to get at least some money for the unemployment, whether it's 600 down to 400 down to 200, but we got to get something done. My belief is they're going to get something done, and it will probably be, I think, the 600 a week, that averages out, I think, to about 31,000 a year in addition to regular unemployment. You keep doing that and folks aren't going to go back to work.
I think this will be the pivotal issue.
Down
that
400,
Democrats,
600, 400, 200. But the Republicans are going to have a trouble getting the deal because the Democrats are going to demand much more.
I think Democrats will win this victory, but coming into January, it'll be really interesting to see whether this sustains. Once we kind of get over the virus, whether this idea of maintaining some of these subsidies is sustained by the Democratic Party for political interest. Perhaps it won't be. Anyway, we shall move
by
on.
January.
By January, well, we'll see what the new Congress looks like. Anyway,
okay,
we'll move on. Predictions, Pat.
I think Joe Biden's vice presidential pick will backfire right in his face. When he said we're only going to have a woman, he eliminated about 3/4 of the Democratic governors, 2/3 of the Democratic senators. Now, with the focus heavily on African-American women, you've eliminated almost all of both except for Kamala Harris. So you're down to congresspersons and you're down to mayors. I think Joe Biden wishes he didn't have a vice president.
All right, Eleanor.
I doubt that you've gotten into Joe Biden's head, but I must say he only has to pick one person.
Somebody better.
Lots of choices. The reason the president is so worried about universal mail-in voting is not because of fraud. It's because the number of requests for absentee ballots from registered Democrats and registered unattached voters, whatever the phrase is for the independents, yes. Is up in North Carolina, for example, by almost 600%, while registered Republicans, it's up 37%. Democrats are going to push voting by mail. They're also going to push dropping your vote off early in drop-off sites and including an expansion of drop-off boxes. So we're all going to get educated now very quickly about how the counting of this election is not going to be overnight. Could take a week, could take a month in some close places.
David.
It really, really pains me to say this because I am a devoted Philadelphia Phillies fan. But as I watch what's happening with the coronavirus and Major League Baseball and so many of the Marlins who had the temerity to beat my Phillies in a 3-game series catch this disease, I don't think they're going to finish the season.
No, that would be a tragedy. Clarence.
It would, but as a Cubs fan, I know how to deal with loss. Anyway, I predicted that President Trump's pitch to his Save the Suburbs crusade, which I call a modern form of political panic peddling, will backfire. The audience out there for this sort of thing, I think, is already pretty well committed as far as President Trump is concerned, and I think things have changed since the 60s. I hope.
Okay, I predict that if Joe Biden wins the presidential election, he will retain, at least for a short time, FBI Director Christopher Wray. Thank you for watching.